All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another episode of the Daniel Teaches Experience, folks. My name is Daniel. I'm here with my good buddy, Mark. Mark, what is going on, champ?
Hey, it's not too much. Yourself?
I'm doing excellent. I'm doing really, really well. Now, folks, the reason why I have Mark on here is to serve as a perfect example of two people who might not see eye to eye on everything, but they're here to talk about their differences. I believe, and I know that Mark shares the same view, that when you disagree with someone about something, you don't block them. You don't throw them out. You don't dehumanize them. You do the opposite. You sit down and you have a conversation. Sometimes you won't even change the other person's mind, but that's okay, right? End state is just, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, and I want to hear why you think the way that you do. Would you say that's a pretty accurate representation, Mark, of both of our perspectives for today?
Pretty much exactly how I see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent.
It's a shame to throw someone out like that and then not understand when you could be wrong. It's a shame to not have that insight.
Yes, definitely. So we're going to talk about a topic that's not controversial at all. It's super black and white. Everybody will understand. We're going to talk about vaccines. Now, we're going to jump into it by talking about why I've chosen to become vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. Why Mark has chosen to not become fully vaccinated. And then from then, we'll just kind of stem on different discussions and conversations and disagreements and things of that nature. So, Mark, if I was to go out on Instagram and say, guys, I got my second shot, most people are going to respond with, yeah, that's great. Good for you, supporting the system.
I agree.
My worry is, Mark, if you go out and say, guys, I didn't feel comfortable taking the shot for whatever reason, so I didn't do it. I'm worried that you're going to get people going, murder, you terrible person. I hope you get hit by a truck. How dare you not feel comfortable to take a vaccine? And that's the reason why I have you on here, to kind of talk about different perspectives. And instead of yelling at someone from afar, we can come together and we can talk about why we did what we did. So, Mark, what would you prefer? Would you prefer that I kind of talk about my thinking and why I got the vaccines? Or would you prefer that you give your piece first on why you've decided not to?
I don't think it matters too much. Whichever you prefer.
Okay, so I feel like I would love to hear yours first, Mark. I would love to hear yours first, of why you have not taken the vaccine and why, not to put words in your mouth, but it doesn't look likely that you will.
Oh, sure. I don't want to be like that doom and gloom. So, yeah, I haven't been vaccinated, but by all means, like if I'm convinced by this conversation, maybe tomorrow I'll go and sign up my vaccination, right? Like that's the position we want to be in here. Is that we can change our minds given different information. So the only reason that there's a couple of reasons that I haven't taken the vaccine. There's a couple of things to consider. Is one, the personal implications of not taking the vaccine, and then the public implications of not taking the vaccine, right? How it affects you and how it affects others, basically. So for personal reasons, I don't think that I'm, mid-20s, late 20s. I'm not in the likely to have serious complications category. I looked up the stats the other day and it was 66 people in my age group in Canada have died out of 2.7 million people that have contracted the virus in Canada, just in Canada. 2.7, that sounds wrong. Anyways, it's a number.
That's
okay. It's very low. Okay. It's like less than 0.5%. It's like 0.05%. And so I'm not very likely to die, even if I contract the disease, which I'm not necessarily likely to do because only about a third of the people in Canada have. A 30th of the people in Canada. So there's that. And then there's the fact that the vaccine could have medical complications that we're not yet aware of because it's only about a year old. It was approved rather quickly. Not speaking to the validity of that because I don't know the medical science behind it, just saying that it was approved very quickly in comparison to most vaccines, which take about 10 years to be approved by the FDA. So there could be medical implications that I don't see, either for myself or for other issues. So that's why I personally don't take it. I'm basically wagering on an unknown possibility versus a known probability that's pretty small, right? So that's the personal reason. And then the public reason was actually, this one's a little more recent that I was able to concretely measure this one down. Originally it was, I don't really interact with a lot of vulnerable people. So I didn't, I'm like, I'm not at a huge risk to give this to a bunch of people who might have really bad effects from this. So that's not the biggest issue for me. That probably could be a little more concrete. But more recently, the information has been coming out that the vaccine doesn't actually prevent transmission, which means that even if you're vaccinated, you can still transmit the disease, which means that there's actually no public reason anymore to get the vaccine, right? If you can still transmit it. Now it's just a personal reason. So those are my two main reasons.
Those are some really good points, man. Those are some really serious concerns. Now, Mark, I'm going to do something where I'm going to say almost verbatim what you told me to make sure
Yes,
that I understood you 100% and that I'm not uh, mischaracterizing your viewpoints. Okay.
please do.
So if I understood you correctly, Mark, your perspective is the reasons why you're not taking this vaccine is one, the chances of you getting it, you look at it as slim. Two, if you did get the vaccine, you're a 20-something-year-old guy. I'm guessing you don't have heart problems. You're not over 60. You're saying, Daniel, I'm probably going to survive. Like, I'm probably going to make it out.
Mhm.
Three, let's see. So this one, oh, the vaccine, it was made in a relatively quick fashion, right? In a quick manner, quicker than I think any vaccine that we can think of
I think
recently.
so. Yeah,
I don't know what the average duration of a vaccine is, but this one took how long? A year? 2 years?
it's been less than a year since it came out. Yeah,
Less than a year. Okay, so you're saying, well, Daniel, that in and of itself could cause some worries. It could have some side effects that we might not figure out until 2, 3, 4 years in the future. Fair point. Then you have that you don't live close to like vulnerable people or vulnerable populations. So you're not living in a senior home. That's four. I feel like there's one more.
and then the most recent one was that the vaccine doesn't actually prevent transmission.
Right,
it just
right.
reduces it and reduces the complications.
I see. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Interesting. Okay. So one, I appreciate your honesty. I like that you're a critical thinker and you took a step back and you go, okay, wait, I'm going to think about this from my own perspective. Just because everyone's doing it, does that mean that I should also go do this if I don't fully believe in it? So here's my perspective on it. When the vaccine, so immediately when the quarantine happened, I said, oh man, you know what? I'm not a fan of the quarantine. I'm not a fan of masks, but I will do whatever we need to do together as a society to come together to defeat this thing, to go back to our regular lives. What are the positive things about COVID? I feel it made you realize, we're all one planet. And at the end of the day, regardless of religion, politics, ethics, we all live on the same planet. And essentially, we all travel, we all talk, and we got to make sure that we're on the same team essentially, and climate change is in that same category. Where even though we have many differences on other things, one of the beauties of COVID was people actually, this is going to sound weird, but coming together to fight this thing, different countries with different policies.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Everybody said, you know what, let's do our fair share of the work to make sure that obviously people don't die, people don't get sick unnecessarily, and we don't transmit it to other people if we don't have to. So I'm putting on the masks when I go out. I take part in everything, right? I put on the masks. I go out. I'm careful about who I talk to. I rarely saw people last year. I've been meaning to see more people this year. And it wasn't until the vaccine came out, and I remember thinking, this is an old like Joe Rogan joke. He's like, depending on what it is, you don't necessarily want to be the first one to do it, but you don't necessarily want to be the last person to do it either. So when the vaccine came out, I kind of stood back and I went, okay, well, if the politicians are taking it, and the business owners and the doctors, and if Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, is seen taking the vaccine, right, and his family and his kids, I'm like, okay, I feel a lot more confident and a lot more comfortable. Now, I can see how people could take that as like a sheep mentality. So Daniel, you saw everybody took the vaccines. You're like, I want to go take the vaccine. At the end of the day, Mark, what I think it comes down to between people who decide to take the vaccine and people who don't decide to take the vaccine is the pros and cons of the situation, right?
Yeah.
If you feel that the cons outweigh the pros in taking the vaccine, I completely understand why you wouldn't take it. Now, I myself was in a position where I was looking at this vaccine and going, so let's go back to your first point, right? Like you said, then I'm probably not gonna get the virus. There was a long time where me and you are living that the cases were really relatively low. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, I'm probably not gonna get it. I'm probably not gonna get it. But if I take this vaccine, like, let's just be, what's the word? Let's just be safe, just in case. Even if the probability is super low. For example, I like to think I'm a good driver. I probably won't get into a car accident, but I'm like, you know what, man? Let's get that insurance just in case.
Yeah.
Just in case some Hail Mary comes in, right?
For sure.
So second point that you said, it was about dying from it. Now, Mark, I am 21 years old. I've never felt better in my life. I work out 3 to 4 times a week. I've been eating super clean. I said to myself, if I get COVID, like the chances that it would really, really, hospitalize me, I don't think it would be a great deal. Personally, I could be wrong. I could get it and I could just, right? But
Yeah.
I'm a young guy. I'm healthy. I'm fit. I don't smoke. I rarely drink. I take care of my health. I could understand that someone in their 60s with heart problems looks at getting COVID a different way than I would.
Precisely.
So in that degree, it was less about my own well-being that I wanted to get the vaccine. There were more other reasons. So again, like the first one, talking about the car insurance example, like what the heck, just in case. Now, the third reason, you talked about not being near a vulnerable population. A place where me and you differ, Mark, is I actually live in an apartment building.
Yeah.
And in this apartment building, the majority of people are over the age of 65, right?
Yep.
So there was an individual that I ran into in the hallway. This might have been 6 or 7 months ago, and he said, "I'm not going to take the vaccine." And he was about in his 50s or something. And I didn't like how that came off, because instead of thinking about individual comfort, my first thought was like, dude, like you might say that you're healthy, right? And I say I'm healthy too, but we live in an apartment building with people with seniors who
Yeah.
have heart problems, who have dementia, who are suffering from cancer. What would you do, Mark? If like I couldn't fathom, I don't get the vaccine because I think I'm healthy. I get COVID. I give it to some poor person living in this apartment building. I recover, and God forbid they pass away.
No,
What
for
do I
sure,
say,
right?
Mark? What do I say?
Yeah.
Oops, I'm
And
sorry.
like I said, that was like one of the hardest parts for me in reconciling not getting it, is because I'm like, well, okay, personally, I don't really want it. And you don't really need a good reason to not get the vaccine for yourself, right? You just need reasonable doubt because it's your own body. You can do what you want with it.
Of course.
But the fact that you could transmit it to someone else, that was a really hard one to overcome. So, like I said, I used the fact that I'm not around vulnerable populations very often, and now the fact that I've been recently convinced that I don't think the vaccine prevents it. So yeah, prevents transmission. So there's that to throw into the mix now. But
Definitely,
I do agree.
man.
I do agree that that's like a really big point that you need to consider, is it's not just about yourself. It is about the safety of others as well.
Now, speaking on that point, I believe there are 2 points left. One of them was the one that on the speed of the vaccine, how quickly it developed, and another one was that there is some research coming out that says if you are fully vaccinated, if I'm not mistaken, you could still get COVID.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty convinced of that. But what is very new to me, I'm not 100% sure, is I have also heard that you can get COVID and you can still transmit it to someone else.
I looked it up about last week or something, actually, before we even said we were going to have this talk. And if you go to the CDC website, it does say it reduces the likelihood.
I saw that too.
But it doesn't prevent it, notably. Right. So it's not technically the same kind of vaccine as like getting a polio vaccine would be, right? Like where you can't get polio or the chickenpox or something like that. So that's just something to keep in mind, because that does change the math a little bit as well.
Absolutely.
If the whole reason, and I don't want to veer too much into the vaccine passports if you don't want to, but like that's one of the other reasons the vaccine passports for like events and such, that they're actually just announcing now where we are, that you like can't go to an event unless you're vaccinated. It's like, but that doesn't stop. Like if you're vaccinated, it only reduces the likelihood of transmission. You could still transmit it. So I don't really understand the reasoning behind that, but it's a weird one.
I'm glad you brought it up, Mark, because I want to touch on all of those. So really quick, just on one point that I want to make sure I address. We talked about like the speed of the vaccine, and I would agree with you. This one developed really quickly. The place where my tone is different from yours, I think a lot of people go, hey, it usually takes 5, 6, 7 years to develop a vaccine. Why did this one get created in less than a year? That's kind of suspicious. My tone is, hey man, if we have the technological advances and capabilities to create a vaccine in less than 1 year, which is scientifically tested, and which like the side effects are minor, and it's a very small amount of the population which does get like I said, like lethal side effects or even minor side effects. Why, like, how about in the future, instead of having this mindset of, oh, it's going to take us 5 to 6 years to develop a vaccine, we can think, oh no, it's possible to develop a vaccine in less than a year. If there's a fire lit under us, and if everyone's working about it, and that is our priority, we can do it. It is possible. So that's kind of where my tone differed a little bit. But
yes, just quickly, to be clear, I don't think it was suspicious or anything like that. It may or may not have been. That's not what I want to talk about.
Okay.
The idea is that there could be long-term implications that we don't yet know, because typically we give these more time to pan out.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, no, thank you for correcting me. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. There very well could be things that we find out a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. So that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Touching on that final point of yours, Mark, that's the one that, I mean, you want to talk about being open-minded, dude. If my biggest thing, and I know a lot of people listening is saying, I don't want to give it to some. I don't want to give it to my parents or the people living in this apartment building. But if it is in fact the case that if you get fully vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and give it to someone, it's like, yikes, man. Because that makes it tough, because that's one of the biggest reasons why I know I took the vaccine. I got fully vaccinated.
It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, because it's one of the biggest driving, like the messages that people have been spreading is like, get the vaccine, you go back to normal because we'll get herd immunity. But if the vaccine's still transmissible, then herd immunity doesn't exist because the people who are vaccinated can still give it to people who aren't.
Yes. Here's what I'd say about that, Mark. I'd say that if I'm vaccinated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say, Mark, you're 65 years old and you're not vaccinated. I could get COVID. I'm totally fine, but then I give it to you, you get COVID, you die,
mm-hmm.
right? What if one really, really good thing, Mark, of getting everybody vaccinated is, one, if I get vaccinated, I can still give you the virus if that is true, but at least it's reduced. The chance of me giving it to you is less. And on top of that, if you are vaccinated, the chance of you getting it is less, and the chance of you dying from it is also less.
That's true. You're absolutely right. It's just, I don't like the narrative of get the vaccine to protect others if it doesn't in fact protect others.
I see where you're coming from. I see where you're coming from. I think that protect is one of those words that we can play around with. If you would have said prevent, I 100% agree with you, because we've both agreed that you getting COVID, even though you have the vaccine, will not 100% prevent you from giving it to someone else. But what we can agree on is that you have a less likelihood chance of getting COVID.
Yeah.
If you get COVID, you have a less likely chance of giving it to someone. Yeah. And if that other person's vaccinated, they have a less likely chance of suffering severe consequences from it. So if your talk is about the prevention thing, I'm 100% on your side. However, if we weigh the pros and cons, at this point in time, in my opinion, I believe that the vaccines still do more harm than good. And I think vaccine passports are a different conversation, which I want to veer into. But
sure.
I want to get your perspective now, like with that last point that I said, like what are your thoughts that come to mind?
I think that your position is pretty reasonable as well. I think we just have a little emphasis on different points, right? Like I don't like the potential long-term or the potential mystery implications of the vaccine.
Gotcha.
And you think it's more valuable that we're protecting everyone. And I think you have a good point. And I don't know that we could delve any further because I think we just disagree on which one is more valuable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I 100% agree with you, man. If you say, Daniel, a concern of mine is possible long-term side effects, I can't deny that. Right? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you're saying like it could protect everyone. You're like, you could be right. I don't know. Well, yes, we'll see. It certainly has been shown to help people, so that's good.
Yes, fingers crossed, man. Good, excellent.
By all means, get the vaccine if you can, if you think you should. Like I'm not saying that anybody else shouldn't get the vaccine. It's purely a conversation about why I did not get the vaccine.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's really, really important to understand that people make their own decisions, and the least that we could do is try to understand why people make the decisions that they do. So I totally agree. Totally agree. Cool. Good. Sometimes people think that like if you bring someone on, you have a conversation, you have to convince their mind. It's like not necessarily.
No.
Not necessarily. It's, what if you're in the wrong, or what if they just don't want to have their mind changed, or what if you can talk for 5 hours, but at the end of the day you just prioritize different things. You know what I mean? Like what are you going to do?
For sure. That's the thing, right? Is like we've had a discussion and now we kind of see where we both stand, and we have different emphasis, like I said, on which point is more important, and that can happen.
Absolutely.
And maybe as new evidence comes available, each of us will change our mind. That's all we can ask for, right?
Oh, 100%, man. If anything, Mark, I respect you more for one, being honest about what you believe in, even though public opinion might not agree with you, and two, coming on the podcast to discuss it, man, because it takes cojones, seriously. So I mean, it's it's good, man. It's good to voice your opinion. Absolutely, you're very welcome. Now let's steer this conversation into vaccine passports.
Sure.
When you first heard about, vaccine passports, what came to mind?
Yeah, so I'm a little less. My arguments are a little less coherent against vaccine passports, perhaps. My gut reaction is that I don't like them as an idea for certain things. I don't know. So I want to make a clear distinction between the vaccine passports that prevent people from traveling to like other states or other countries, and then the idea of the new idea that people are implementing is like where you can't go into businesses or sports conversations if you don't have the vaccine. I think those are two different things to consider, because we have had like you can't travel between countries in the past for other sicknesses. I don't know if we've had the smaller regulations. Actually, I'd have to look that up. I forgot to get around to that.
That's right.
And that one, yeah. So they're a little different in my mind. But what were your gut reactions on the vaccine passports?
Man, my first thought was, I guess what my perspective was when I first heard about stores here saying, hey, you can only enter with a mask on, like mask was mandatory. I thought, okay, you're a business, you have certain rules. If I want to enter into that business, I have to wear a mask, no problem. And when I heard about this whole vaccine passport thing coming out, I kind of viewed it in that same path. I said, well, the store wants me to wear a mask to walk in. You want me to, and also, Mark, I was pretty convinced that I was already going to get vaccinated. Yeah. So like it was easier for me to kind of fall into that line of thinking. But I really thought I was like, you know what, man, I understand. Like if I want to, let's say, go to America in the middle of COVID, they want to know that I have both vaccines. It's like fair enough. The big thing for me, Mark, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, is when I heard the vaccine passports, I really didn't differentiate it too much from like the traveling from country to country, as opposed to just, you wanting to enter a restaurant or you want to enter like a business of some sorts. So my perspective, I wasn't cheering, I wasn't booing, but I was like, okay, fair enough. But I did hear that there were a lot of people who were really happy with it, like that were cheering it. And there were a lot of people that were completely against it, like Joe Rogan, like Abba and Preach, people that I follow who are really awesome critical thinkers. And Abba, I don't know which one of them, but one of them was like, they were going to get the vaccine until they found out that they were going to do COVID passports, like vaccine passports. And then that made them go, no, I don't want to.
Oh, what?
So even that, like the idea of the legislation coming down on people made some people go, you're taking away my freedom, and you're maybe forcing me or forcing people to do something that they might not be comfortable doing. But that case was interesting because the guy from like Abba and Preach, he was going to get the vaccine. It was until that got announced that was like, oh, well, now you're going to force me to. Well, now I'm not going to.
That's
interesting.
I want to say childish in the sense of like, oh, you're going to tell me to do something? No, I'm not going to.
For sure.
But yeah, there's certainly like a lot of it's politicized again, right? It's like this could lead to like government blah blah blah. I don't want to focus on that again because that's just not where I'm coming from.
Okay. Yeah.
So I
guess the biggest thing, Mark, that I want to ask you is, you understand, I shouldn't say you understand, but you're for people looking at passports, for example, if you have like what were some of the other like sicknesses that they use?
Yeah, so as an example, my friend went to Japan the other year and they checked for tuberculosis shots, right? Because tuberculosis is crazy deadly and contagious, and you can't enter the country unless you have one. So that's effectively the same thing, right?
Okay, no, that makes sense. And what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that's probably fine. And as I said, I think the passports from country to country is probably fine, because if you have an outbreak, you want to limit it to one area so that if in the worst case everyone in that area dies, not everyone in the entire world dies, I guess. Because I guess the purpose behind a vaccine passport, right, is to prevent the spread from one region to another. I'm less sold on like the individual businesses and sports concerts and events doing it, because they're still in the same area. So like you won't have that one vector for transmission, but you will still have other vectors in that area for transmission. And then another point is, if we take the CDC at their face value and the vaccine doesn't actually prevent you from having or transmitting COVID, what's the point of a vaccine passport if you can still transmit it?
Yeah, that's fair, man. That's fair. You're saying regardless of if I have the vaccine or not, if I happen to have COVID, I can still transmit it either way.
Yeah, so
and that defeats the purpose.
It would defeat the entire purpose of preventing the spread. It would lessen the likelihood, sure, but we don't know to what extent yet because we haven't had enough time to study all these things, which leads me back to my original point of everything's still too new.
Of course, because then I could easily say, well, if everyone else in there is vaccinated, right, then they could get it.
But then you don't need the vaccine passport because everyone's vaccinated.
Right, but you want to have some sort of in my opinion, something that says like, yep, like we can validate that you are indeed vaccinated. You know what I mean? Rather than just taking someone's word. Now, I don't know if that's vaccine passports, but you know how like, and this might be, I don't know if how appropriate of an example this is, but like, they're the same reason we have a driver's license, right? For driving, right? And like, you can tell someone, man, I know how to drive, but it's, you want something official that says, I am indeed vaccinated. So that doesn't mean I can't get it. And that doesn't mean I can't give it to someone, but that means I will, again, man, I don't want to repeat myself. Sorry, Mark, but you know exactly what I'm going to say, right? You know exactly what I'm going to say. I guess my big point here that I just want to hit home is a part of me really likes that you have something certified that says, yep, we can approve the idea that Mark or that Daniel has gotten the vaccine, which means that he could still get it, but it's less likely he'd die. It's less likely he'd give it to someone else. But if he did, and if everybody in there's got the vaccine, they won't die either. So at least if everybody's got a vaccine passport in my head, and everyone's got the vaccine, it's not okay, it's gone. So in the sense of like a chicken pox or like a polio or something, but in the sense of if you get it, I won't be worried. You know what I mean? Like you got it. Oh, you're vaccinated. All right, man. It's just, probably taken care of. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But I've heard a lot of people, Mark, take your perspective on the vaccine passports thing, man, and they look at it as just bananas, like nuts. Like I was listening. Sorry, you go ahead.
I was gonna say a part of me wonders is if I was vaccinated, if I'd still be on the same fence, because like I said, this one, the vaccine passports it's not something I'm entirely sold on. I'm still working through. So I wonder if I was vaccinated, if I'd care as much. Because then I wouldn't, but as it is, right, I might be getting denied access to certain things that I can't do because I'm not vaccinated, which is annoying. And I think that might be part of the reason that I'm on that fence. Jury's still out on that one. I'm still working through that.
Hey, I appreciate your honesty, man. I would like to agree with you, man. I'd like to say that I feel like if you did have the vaccine, you'd be like, oh, I'm like, this doesn't apply to me.
Yeah,
whereas if you don't have the vaccine, you'd be like, oh, I can be excluded from entering a restaurant, going to a movie theater. In that sense, so I understand where you're
coming. And another scary thing, right, is I work at a business. If they have, if that business gets a vaccine passport, but can I not go to it? But the legislation currently says that you can't be denied employment because you don't have a vaccine, right? But that would have to change. Otherwise, like I could come into the business to work, but I couldn't come into shop. That doesn't make any sense.
You're right. That doesn't make any sense. So either they have to force everyone who works there. That sounds like a bad word, but they have to politely persuade everyone who works there.
Yeah,
that's a nice way to say it, huh? Politely persuade everyone who works there to get the vaccine. Because you're right. That's hypocrisy. If you say workers don't have to get the vaccine, but you got to get the vaccine to shop there, well, you're going to be in that area regardless. So one or the other has to give.
And that seems like a dangerous precedent to set. Like you have to get a vaccine to be able to work in Canada. I don't like that.
I understand. Yeah. No, I mean, if someone's like, Daniel, I don't feel comfortable taking this vaccine, just like I don't feel comfortable being in a certain medical procedure, and I'm being forced to do it in order to go to work. Like, you got a point, man. You got a point. But like again, going back to like the tuberculosis shot, right? What if someone says, Daniel, I'm not comfortable getting the shot, but like your friend said from Japan, it's like it is a one or the other. It is, if you don't have this shot, like you're not getting in, or if you don't have your passport present at the airport, man, like you have to, Or let's take one step further. If you're not a Canadian citizen, you can't work at a certain job permanently. You can't get tenure, over here. So there's definitely certain areas where it is a little bit more black and white. I understand where you're coming from, man. I guess one thing that I'm definitely on the fence about too is, where's the line of this is an unreasonable thing that you're asking an individual to do versus, if I want to do certain, like if I want certain opportunities to go to school somewhere, if I want my university to pay 2/3 of my tuition, I have to be a Canadian citizen, right? Yeah. Otherwise, I'll be an international student. And that's one of those things where someone will go, well, I have to become a Canadian citizen. Like, well, what if I don't want to? What if I have to give up my other citizenship in order? What if I can't be a dual citizen? Or what if I'm already dual citizens and I have to sacrifice, right? So in those positions, I feel like it's more commonly accepted where I go, yeah, like it is what it is. You're either a domestic student or international. And if you're international, you're going to get a different service, or you're going to have to pay a different amount of money. And now in this business sense, I think if Canada does keep going down this route, I'm curious if businesses are going to say, hey, everybody needs to be vaccinated or have a vaccine passport in order to work.
It's weird. It's a complicated issue, right? So like, because you're right about the tuberculosis one. It's like, you can't enter the country unless you have this. Are you, I guess you're also probably required to get the shot as a kid then, or somewhere when you're growing up?
Man, when I was a kid, man, when I was 10, 11, 12, 15, they were giving me shots left and right in school.
Sure.
I don't remember what they were. I just know I went in, I showed up, God bless them. I didn't even know what the shot was for. I remember I'd go home with like a piece of paper to my parents and it said, hey, you know, your child needs to have had at least these 3 or 4 shots like in his life. One was for chicken pox, one was for other things. And my parents would either write down the date that I got said shot, or if not, I'd have to get those shots like in school.
Yeah.
Right. And they give me lollipop afterwards. So I mean, maybe it could also be like an area of like desensitization. You know what I mean? Like I've gotten shots like chickenpox, like other ones, even though we said earlier that it's not like a polio where you'll never get it. So it is a little bit different in that sense. But at the end of the day, right, the vaccine is still a vaccine. And I feel like it's easier for people like me to digest it, to do it, to take it. I myself, I haven't had any side effects, 0.
Nice.
I have had people, like for example, my parents did take the vaccine. They experienced some fever. They experienced tiredness that lasted about 2 days or so.
Yeah.
I personally took it. I didn't experience anything. So I think, Mark, if someone like yourself in his mid-20s if he was worried about like immediate side effects, I would like to say it's pretty low. Like, I mean, I don't do anything crazy. I'm not an athlete, you know, but I have a reasonable body mass index. I'm not considered obese. Again, I don't smoke. So I think for people in our world, if they did take the vaccine, the chances of immediate side effects, I'm not talking like 2-3 years down the road, but like the immediate ones following are pretty slim.
Yeah.
And when I was talking to the nurse who was giving me the shot, there were a bunch of little like minor side effects that said like you can have a sensitive shoulder. That's the only thing. My shoulder was a bit sensitive for 1 or 2 days. You know, you could have a fever. You could sweat a lot. There were 2 or 3 others, but they said about 1 in 100,000 people, this is what the nurse told me, experiences some inflammation around the heart, which would lead to chest pain, and then you'd have to go to the hospital. So again, weighing pros and cons, I said 1 in 100,000. I'll take that bet, baby. But that's just me, right?
Interesting.
So, but going back to to your point originally, yes, my friend. As a kid, I've definitely gotten vaccines for like little things here and there. So I feel like that definitely made it easier for me to approach this one in a more positive light.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a complicated issue by all means. I don't think there's any obviously right answers.
Yes, I agree.
There probably will be right answers looking back on it 10 years, but
when we all turn into zombies, and you say,
exactly.
I told you so.
And I'll be the only one, not a zombie.
Oh man, interesting. Yeah, man, vaccine passports. It's an interesting thing because
it's complicated.
Because like I might think a certain way, right? And like again, when I first heard vaccine passports, I felt like, yeah, this is a good thing. Great, this is awesome. And then when I went online and I looked at some of the people who I follow, whose opinions I value, like Joe Rogan's, he was super against vaccine passports, and he was saying things like I can't believe people are doing this. I can't believe people are like applauding it. Like, this is crazy. And then his guest, I don't remember who the guest was on. He said, why would people applaud vaccine passports? And this is the part that unfortunately Mr. Rogan let me down. And he said, because they're dumb. Because they're just dumb people, you know, and right. And I'm like, oh, and like obviously, folks, this is important. If I listen to Joe Rogan, that doesn't mean I agree with everything that he says. I can agree with some and disagree with others. Sure. But it was just so eye-opening to hear him refer to people like me who are sheep and who are dumb. But when I talk to people who have been vaccinated and who are the extreme on the other side, they would look at people who haven't vaccinated. They'd call them dumb and a sheep and like conspiracy theorists. You know what I mean? So just to see both sides calling each other the same thing was very it was just sad. It was just unfortunate. It was like, oh man,
it's disheartening to just see people be like, oh, I'm right and you're wrong, and I don't care why. It's so annoying, and something I've always thought it's just tragic about. I don't know if this is new to the internet age, since I'm, this is only the only age I ever grew up in, obviously, but It's probably something people have been doing forever, right? Like
Oh, for
propaganda
sure,
exists
for
for a
sure.
long time.
I would think, man, I at least one of the good things about social media, or so I thought, was that you can experience other people's opinions. You could hear other people's perspectives. But what the algorithm does, if it
Yeah,
knows, Mark, you like a certain thing, it just makes your world really small. So you
yeah.
only see what you want to see. So that's been unfortunately a problem.
Yeah.
But
See, I thought similarly with the advent of information and the wealth of knowledge that we have on the internet today, that we'd eventually come to a consensus on what, we'd have enough discussion so we could come to a consensus on what is right or what's true. But unfortunately, how it actually seems to pan out is people have their ideas, find communities that agree with them, and never see anything else because the internet is so massive that you can just only ever interact with people that you agree with, which is so tragic. And I wish it worked differently, but no, but the algorithms too, the way that they just feed you stuff that you already see from people that you don't know, it reinforces that mindset of sticking to your own group of people. It's tribalism, essentially, right?
I was exactly gonna say that, man. That us versus them
Yeah.
mentality. You know what I mean? Oh, you're not one of us, so you're an enemy. It's like, whoa, dude, we gotta be careful. We gotta be extremely careful. Like, how do people think Hitler rose to power? How do you think the Nazis did what they did, and Joseph Stalin did what they did, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is doing what it's doing? It starts from this us versus them mentality. The first thing that people will do, Mark, in my opinion, is they'll say what you're saying is harmful or in some way bad for society. You need to be silenced. Now that's political correctness or whatever. You need to stop talking about what you're talking about. 2, if you continue, you will be punished or you will be fined. 3, we have to eliminate you because we think it's the right thing to do. So when I talk to people who sometimes, and me and you were having this discussion, man, like, how could Hitler do such a thing? How could 80 million people, fall into this like brainwashed idea and commit all these atrocities? And yet that one day that we were talking, Mark, I told you how a friend of mine who is compassionate, kind, and loving told me that if he could press a button and kill every Trump supporter on the planet, he would.
Yeah.
From a kind, compassionate person who would run out of his home at 3 a.m. in the rain to like help like a wounded dog in the street, would have such a, I mean it, I bet you money he would have such a cruel and evil and just this disgusting perspective towards a group of people.
Yeah, it's just so sad to see people become that radical. Like I don't know how that, I don't know. I guess it happens slowly over time, right? You have one piece of information and then you get another piece, and eventually you just tie one person with another. But like, how do you think you combat that? Because I would just say the way to combat it is with more information, but that doesn't always work because they don't want more information.
You tell me, man. You expand on this stuff.
I don't know, man. Like, I don't know how you can convince someone who doesn't want to talk. I can't even imagine where to begin. Perhaps you could show them the outcome of their weight. I don't know. It would have to be actions if they want to talk, but it's not something I've been able to solve yet.
Me neither, man. Me neither. Mark, call me a label, and say a label that's not very nice sounding. Like, call me like racist or something.
What? Oh, you're a homophobe.
Okay, I'm a homophobe, so I'm homophobic, right? You are convinced that I'm homophobic, okay?
Sure am.
No matter what I've done in my past, no matter what accomplishments, no matter what accolades, you're going to perceive me through that homophobic lens. I could go donate $10,000 to Children's Cancer Foundation, and you are going to look at me not as a nice guy, not as someone who volunteers or who donates. You're going to look at me as a homophobic person first, and then what I've done. And then if you go, well, Daniel donated $10,000 to a Children's Cancer Foundation, you're going to somehow fit that into the conclusion that you already have. But homophobic people are bad people. Bad people don't donate. So either one, Daniel's a good person, which is probably not true. So how would a bad person, you know what I mean? So now you try to play this narrative and you go, well, he's homophobic, he did that. Oh, maybe he's getting bad press because he's homophobic. So he wants to do this to bring attention away from us. That son of a, do you know what I mean?
I do.
So all of a sudden, there is nothing that I can do, Mark. If you view me as sexist, homophobic, racist, I could plead, Mark, like, please listen to the podcast. That's not what I mean. That's not my intention. That's not my message. But if you view me as a racist, a sexist, a homophobic, I might be so far gone in La La Land that you might say, he's not even worth talking to. I don't even want to associate with this person.
Yeah, they work from their conclusion, right? And they work backwards. They're like, oh, this is the case. You're a bad person. So anything that you do is bad. Not, oh, you do actions. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. So you must be a medium person. It's just, you're a bad person. Anything you do, therefore, is bad. And it's so, I want to say backwards, but honestly, I think that's probably how just human minds work by default. And I think it actually takes a lot of effort to counteract that.
I agree with you, man. I agree with you. I think it's harder to do what we're doing and really break it down and to, because you can't think that way if you're open-minded. You can't think that way if you have, if you want to hear someone else's perspectives. You can only do that if, in my opinion, you are closed-minded, dangerously arrogant, ignorant, and shallow. Arrogant because I claim that I'm right, Mark, and you're wrong about the vaccines. And Mark, you must be dumb because I know I'm smart. And if you disagree with me, well, there's only smart or there's dumb. Exactly. So then you must be dumb. But I don't take a second to go, wait a minute, what if I'm the dumb one? What if I'm the one who's not seeing something? Arrogance is there. Second, ignorant. I don't care what you have to say, Mark. I don't care about your reasons for not taking the vaccines. It doesn't matter. You're not taking the vaccines, blocked. F you. You should get fired from your work because me and you disagree. I'm ignorant towards that. And finally, shallow, because I feel like in order to be open-minded, you need to be curious. You need to go deep into conversations. And it's one thing to care about your thoughts, Mark, but I care about your belief system, right? Because your thoughts stem from your beliefs. If I can understand, what your beliefs are, your thoughts will make a whole lot more sense to me. Oh, that's why Mark said this, because he believes this. So his thought is rooted in, so I think, man, those things being arrogant, being closed-minded, arrogant, ignorant, and shallow. I think those are the four giant vices which make it hard for an individual to sit down and have a discussion like we're having right now. I said a lot, man. What are your thoughts from what I just said?
I think you've hit most of it right on the nose. Yeah. I was actually having a conversation with someone just earlier before I came on the podcast, and we were talking about, or he said something like, I don't want to be caught championing a view that's wrong, which is a position that I've often held. But I had this idea. I was like, you know what? I don't actually want to be the person who's caught defending a position that's wrong. I want to be the person who defends a position that's wrong for good reasons, finds out that he's wrong, and then switches sides because he has better reasons now, right? Like, that to me is the ideal person, where they're like, I think I have good reasons, so I'm going to defend something. Oh, I don't have good reasons, or new information has come to light. Just kidding, I'm now defending the other side because there's better reasons. And then that changes over time, and you eventually become the best person that you can because you have the best reasons forged through discussion.
That's so brilliant, Mark. That is so brilliant, man. I want to say this for the people listening. I think taking the vaccine is a good thing. I don't agree with people who don't take the vaccine. I think vaccine passports are a relatively good thing. So we disagree on those two things, but on this third one, I could not disagree. I could not agree with you more. I literally could not agree with you more, man. Like, I think that is such a healthy and such a mature way to look at life, and not being afraid of being wrong. But you do the opposite, right? You champion, if it is wrong, you champion what you think is right, but you're not afraid of being wrong. And I think that's this, I don't know if it's ego, I don't know if it's self-esteem, but I think people just get tied down to this thing of like, I have to be right. And they become attached. I think Jordan Peterson has something like this in his new book, 12 More Rules for Life or something. It's like, don't get attached to your ideology, right? If you're attacking the ideology, you're not attacking me, you're attacking an idea. I don't have to die with the idea. The idea being abandoned doesn't mean I'm getting abandoned, right? I could switch sides and come to your side of the fence. So I 100% agree with you, Mark. I would rather be wrong for something that I believe in and then gladly change my mind and say, oh, you know what? I didn't think about this. And I'll hop over the fence rather than do the opposite, rather than be afraid to share my views because, oh, what if I'm wrong?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's not to say like you should jump ship all the time or like you should change your mind very often. It's just like when you want to do your due diligence still, but like when you're convinced or when new information comes to light that you think is better, you can it's okay to change your mind because you could be wrong.
Absolutely. I really wanted to nail that at that point home, man. It's okay to change your mind because you could be wrong.
Yeah. That's like my whole philosophy
It's
in
okay.
life.
That's brilliant, man. That is so good. I worry, Mike, that too many people hear that and they go, oh, he's naive. For the people listening, we're not saying anybody, some goof rolls in and tells you X, you're going to say, okay. No,
Exactly.
we're not
No.
saying be blindly agreeable. We're actually saying the opposite. Be a critical thinker. Stand up for what you believe in. Even if people disagree, even better, because either maybe they're not seeing something that you are and you could teach them something, or maybe they're seeing something that you're not and they could teach you something. So I really want people listening to don't take being open-minded as being naive and letting people walk all over you. No. It's standing up for what you believe in within reason and being open to have a discussion.
Yeah, that's a brilliant thing to point out. It's like you want to argue your point, but you don't want to be so headstrong that you're wrong and you don't realize that the other person has a good point as well, right? It's like we've talked about vaccines now, and I'm considering more than ever, like, should I get it because it helps protect people? That's actually like a very convincing argument that I'm not sure yet. So as time passes, we'll pan out and see what happens.
I appreciate that so much, Mark. Man, I literally just put up something on my Instagram a day or two ago, something along the lines of this. I said something like, and this isn't my quote. This is something I heard online. It is a gift, or it is an artwork to be able to entertain a thought without necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with it.
Oh, I see. I've heard that quote.
Perfect. I don't know who said it originally, but just the very idea, Mark, that you said, you know what, Daniel, you had some solid points. I'm not saying I'm going to blindly agree with you, but I'm not going to completely shun you out either. I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind. And who knows? Maybe I end up taking the vaccine a week, 2 weeks from now, or maybe I don't. But the fact that you respect my points and that you are such a humble guy and you are not insecure and you're confident in yourself, in my opinion, without putting words in your mouth, gives you the ability to go, you know what, man, I'm going to genuinely consider that, because you don't worry about being wrong. You don't worry about your ego. You don't worry about, oh, how is this going to make me look? Not at all. It's the opposite. And I think, Mark, you are a champion for the way to think about life. I really, really do. I sincerely believe that. I think this was the perfect example of people coming and we disagree about some things, but we completely agree about other things. Like we have the same philosophy in a lot of senses. And I think this is, you are such, and it's awesome because people hear my voice a lot. So I love that they're able to hear it from someone else. And maybe it's entirely possible, Mark, some people listening to this podcast are probably like, man, anybody who doesn't want to get the vaccine is probably not a very smart guy. And the fact that they were able to listen to you now, I would be very surprised if this conversation hasn't influenced them and go, you know what, man, like Mark is a very influential person. He spoke in a very articulate manner. He made some very good points. Maybe I disagree with the first two, but I agreed with the last three. And even if it doesn't completely change their mind, it opens up their perspective to, okay, I can disagree with people, but that doesn't mean that I should block them out, or that, or just a bunch of those things. You know what I mean, Mark?
It's such a valuable skill to be able to shop with someone without completely disagreeing or disavowing. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. I always credit Joe Rogan. The reason why this is called the Daniel Teaches Experience, it's paying homage to him. He was the first guy that I saw bring on Ben Shapiro, who thinks very strongly about certain things, but also brought on Bernie Sanders, right? He brought on Kid Cudi and Mike Tyson and Robert Downey Jr., Jamie Foxx. Who was that other guy? Alex Jones. So people from a bunch of different worlds, and I was like, wow. And I understand why Joe Rogan gets called homophobic or transphobic or this and that. It's because by merely associating with these people throw a label on them. Yeah. Daniel had a podcast with Mark. I don't think Mark had the vaccine. They're both anti-vaxxers. to hell with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than, and I think this goes back to your point so brilliantly, Mark, is people who are closed-minded, they're not going to listen to this podcast. You can't be closed-minded and be like, well, let me see what the anti-vaxxer has. You know what I mean? You have to be open-minded to even check out the podcast. So going back to what you said about if people think I'm homophobic and I make a podcast about how it's bad to be homophobic, we should be accepting and loving, the people who should mostly, like the most important group of people who should listen to the podcast, the homophobic people, they're not going to listen. It'll be the people who already agree with me who listen.
Yeah.
And that's the comical part.
It's kind of sad in a way because they're the people who don't need to listen to it, but it's also good for them to get new perspectives still.
Of course, man, of course. Oh man, this was interesting. This is really interesting, Mark. Oh, I'm trying to think what else comes to mind in this world of disagreements, in this world of just dehumanizing people, insulting people for disagreeing with you. Are there any other thoughts, Mark, that come off to your mind that you wanted to share?
Well, we can touch a little bit on what we were talking about last time. It's like, while it is a valuable skill to be able to disagree with people and still listen to their arguments, it should be noted that some people are in fact malicious or bad will, right? Like there is people who are manipulating you and trying to screw you over. And you have to be able to sometimes say, look, I'm not actually going to listen to your points because your points, it's not wrong, but like your points are ill-intentioned, right? You're not actually arguing from a point of good faith. You're arguing from, or something you believe. You're arguing from either virtue signaling or like just trying to convince the other person that they're wrong or something. This doesn't come up very often, and it's very hard to actually spot, but it is something to keep in mind, I think, is there are malicious people out there.
You make a good point, Mike. One of my weaknesses, you could say, is I'm such an open-minded person, and this might sound really wrong, but I'm going to say it because I believe this way. If I met a neo-Nazi, like if I met a person actually today in 2021 who was for Hitler and thought he did the right thing, I might bring him on the podcast.
No, dude, I'm the same way, right? Like, it's like my default is just like, oh, you have a different opinion than me? Let's talk. But it's not always that clear cut, unfortunately. Sorry,
of course. So a lot of people, no, that's fine. I completely agree with you. You know, I think me and you were both curious people, and we like talking to people who disagree with us. The problem with that is, Mark, there's a lot of people who would look down on the fact that we seek discussion, and that's something that I will almost see. Like we have certain things, right, Mark? Like as open-minded as we are, we both have our things that we go, you know what? This is a line that I'm not even willing to cross.
Yeah.
Like this is something that, like, I do not agree with the fact that if you disagree with someone, the best thing to do is to go up yours and block them and never talk to them again. Right? That's just something that, no, I think we do the opposite. We bring people together. I was actually talking to two of my friends, probably like over a year ago now, Anson and Smith, and we were talking about that. I was saying, guys, like everybody deserves a seat at the table, blah, blah, blah. And then one of them was like, well, Daniel, maybe not everyone. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, what if someone is like inciting violence? You know, what if someone is actively telling people, are you going to say they have free speech to, you know, hey, every time you see a black guy in the street, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you do kind of get to that line where I push into that sphere in the sense of, I want to hear what that person says. I don't believe in insulting people. I don't believe in being petty. I believe in if I'm going to like deconstruct something, it'll be that person's argument and their line of thinking. And I would love to do that on the podcast so people can listen and maybe I learn something new, maybe they learn something new. But at what point, and this is something that I don't know, at what point do you go, your intent is so malicious and so harmful that putting you on a podcast and like there's no room for discussion. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I don't know what that line is because I'm a very open-minded person. So maybe, oh man.
It's probably not a general line that you can draw, unfortunately. It's probably very much contextual, right? Like you've interacted with this person a couple of times and you're like, okay, I don't think that you're well-intentioned. So it's probably good that we should talk about. I don't know that you can draw a general line, unfortunately, as much as I'd love to be able to. And one other thing I think that you need to be aware of, Daniel, is because you have a platform now, right? You have a different responsibility from me, where I can just like go down the street and talk to a neo-Nazi. If you bring a neo-Nazi on the show, it sends a different message, both for your audience and what about his audience, right? Like what if you bring him on and he actually just spends the entire time talking to his audience through you?
Mm.
and spreading his message.
I'm glad you said that, man. I'm glad you said that. Huh. That's interesting.
That's something to
interesting.
consider. I err on the side that I think you should keep doing what you're doing, bring people on and do those conversations. Just something to keep in mind, because I've seen it go up.
No, you're right. I'm glad you said that, Mark. I'm really glad you said that, because what the podcast is essentially, it's me, it's my close friends listen to this podcast. It's nothing huge. It's not like it gets thousands of views or
Yeah,
anything.
for sure.
But if it does get to a point, who knows, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, I keep doing this once a week. I bring on different guests. The popularity grows. But you make a good point, Mark. You could really bring some people on who might have not so good intentions, and they could spread some really negative messages on you if you give them a free platform and like a giant audience. So I guess it's just on the podcast host to be able to differentiate.
I think so, yeah.
Kind of who gets a voice and who doesn't. And then I feel like, Mark, that puts me in a weird place, because I want to be the guy that says yes to you, Mark, when everyone else says no.
Yeah.
If people look at you and they go, no, Mark, I don't want to have you on because I've actually heard this, because you're white, so your opinion is irrelevant on the matter.
Yeah.
Or they go, no, man, I don't want to have you on, Mark, because I don't talk to people who haven't done the vaccine. Even though, like you said, like, I'm on the fence. I could be persuaded. That conversation could be the thing that pushes you over. So that's a shame in and of itself. But I want to be that guy that says, you know what, Mark, you don't have a giant following, right? You don't have giant sponsorships. I don't care, man. I just care about the conversation. So thank you for saying that, Mark. It'll really be me in the next few years. It'll be balancing this line between giving the people who don't have a voice versus there's a reason you don't have a voice.
Yeah.
And that's because 95% of people can agree that what you're saying is harmful.
Yeah. I think I've seen it done, and I think this is the way I love best anyways, I don't know, is you bring those people on anyways, and you just make sure that you have good arguments against their points, so that you actually provide a well-reasoned viewpoint from the other side, right? You're not just bringing them on to let them talk about their message. You're being like, here's your message. Oh, have you considered this counterpoint? And you talk to the viewers more of like, right, you try to convince them that probably shouldn't believe the neo-Nazi thing, but something to consider.
That's a really good point, man. That's a really good point. You're right. I hate when I hate saying that this is like an interview, because it's not. It's more like a conversation. But I hate when I sometimes listen to podcasts and the host will ask the guest a question, and then mid-answer he'll just keep interrupting. And I'll be like, dude, like,
oh yeah.
I want to listen to him. You brought him on for a reason. Why do you keep cutting him off? So I'm really mindful of letting the other person finish their thought. But you make a good point, man. You should definitely. You shouldn't be too passive. You should have a sense of activeness and giving your points and countering when appropriate, for sure.
Probably only when it's like a message that you consider harmful or dangerous, but
absolutely. Man, Mark, dude, thank you so much for coming on, man.
No worries.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, man, it was awesome, especially because I feel like people if people think they're gonna have a disagreement, a lot of times they're like, I'm just gonna avoid that. So the fact that me and you just go face first, we're like, let's talk about it. Why do you see differently? I think that's really cool. I think that's a breath of fresh air. Mark, man, I gotta tell you something about the vaccine thing. Your point about like the long-term effects, what it could be 2, 3, 4 years down the line. That's something that I generally hadn't considered too much. Like I'd heard it once and I kind of brushed it off, but this conversation has definitely made me just take that idea a little more seriously.
Yeah.
And definitely put it on higher value. So that's something that I've definitely taken away from this conversation. And by the sounds of it, a few of my points about, the transmitting, or at least you giving it to someone, they have a better chance of fighting it off or of not being affected as severely. I'm sure that's made a.
Yeah, likewise, I was going to say your point about, like, I draw the distinction between, being immune to the virus so you can't transmit it and being able to transmit it. And I kind of ignored the degree to which you can still transmit it, because we don't actually know what that is yet. But if it's low, if it's like half as much or less than that, right, that's actually a big deal, and you should probably still get the vaccine for that reason. So yeah, that's another thing to consider that I probably wasn't fully recognizing.
Absolutely. Mark, my man, I appreciate you coming on here, man. Thank you. This was really, really interesting. It was really enlightening for me to hear your perspectives and where you're coming from, what your thoughts are. And I'm very, very sure that the people listening really appreciated this opposite of opinions and this kind of back and forth.
I enjoyed it immensely. And I'm glad there's someone like you on the internet doing exactly what I think should be done.
Thank you, buddy. That means a lot to me, Mark. That really, really does, man. Thank you. Mark, who is there like usually like when people close out, is there like another podcast like mine that you listen to, or like a YouTube channel that you listen to that has conversations like this that you'd recommend to people?
The one that I'd recommend is probably rather controversial, so I don't know about that. But I do like the fellow, his name is Destiny on YouTube.
Destiny.
He streams a lot on Twitch. And I think he's not, like you said, he's kind of like the Joe Rogan for me, where he'll bring on a bunch of other people, right? And he'll talk to their points. He's a very controversial figure, as I said. Lots of people think he's a really bad person because of people he's brought on or things he's done. Lots of people like him for other reasons. I find that his arguments are usually quite salient and well reasoned. You could check him out and find for yourself if you want.
Excellent, buddy. Love it. Mark, buddy, it has been an absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much for being on. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Daniel Teaches Experience, folks. Take care.